Good evening, everybody. Today is Monday, February 7th, and this is MEP class. Today in class, we're going to be going over the information in regards to calculations just a little bit, and then we're going to be getting into the fun stuff and how we actually draw this stuff out in Revit. As you work through these calculations, you probably notice that there's a lot to work in, and doing this by hand can get very tedious, but I think just by working it out will give you some idea how this stuff can translate into the real world. But luckily, we live in the century that we do, and now, like, whenever you have an HVAC guy come out, they can always plug this stuff into an online calculator, which will make things so much easier for us. And as architecture people, we're not usually the ones that are doing these calculations, but it's nice to know how they work out and how these things are calculated, and how once they give us a layout, what it actually means, instead of just like, most people are just looking at the ductwork and make sure it lays in the right spaces, which, it's one of the things that we want to look at too, because we always want to pay attention to the overall look and feel of the building. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about the calculations that we have here. Jonathan, these came out really good. So no problem with that. And then just with steps through here. So he has all the calculations out here. Come out to 205,000 BTUs per floor. Divided that by 12, and these units would be 17-ton units, which is great. Now, we're not going to have anything that's going to translate to 17-ton in the Revit model portion of it. We'll talk about what type of models we're going to be using when we get there. And the duct sizing came out really good as well. So here we started with our BTUs per floor, divided that by 10,000, took the 300 CFM that we were set to use and multiplied that by this amount. Continued the steps that we had.
So I did. I'm sorry, Ms. Martin. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it sounds like you're in a tunnel, but yeah, you're good.
Yeah, sorry. It's probably got some reverb on there. My bad.
No problem.
So is that right? So those were like, is that right? So the duct per room, like the two different duct sizes that you asked us to use, does all that look right to you? Like
it does. But remember that these are 8x8 size ducts, and then you compare those to the size of the room that you have. These are actually really small rooms. I mean, 5,000 square foot sounds like a lot, but a lot of these are really small rooms, so they are breaking down into the correct amount. So yeah.
So that you figure out the CFM per vent, and then you find ways to fit that into the rooms you need, and as long as it comes in under that 615 CFM per unit, that's correct, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. So those came out very good. And they're going to be off a little bit, and a lot of times when you get into the real world too, they'll take these as a base calculation, and they'll may adjust it a little bit depending on the size of the room and what else is going on in the room. Now we did take into consideration the windows, but if these windows were a larger size, if they were like, even though we just calculated it for the 1,000, even if these are bigger windows, you may want to put in larger vents in there as well. Also, depending on what's going on in those rooms. If these rooms are being used as labs and you have a lot of heat generated by the computers, you're going to want to add some other ones as well. So this is not a hard and fast rule. It gives people a basis to kind of jump off where we want to add these vents and things like that. And a lot of it's really based on the size of these. Now, like for instance here, this is a 900 square foot room. it's the biggest room that we have in there, and you've got two 8x8 ducts. Now, vents, we may want to move up to bigger ducts and vents on that, just to make sure that this room has enough air in it. So this is just kind of a basis that we can start off from. We definitely wouldn't want a bigger duct in this square foot 300 or this 290, these smaller rooms right here. So you want to think about that as well. So we go by the calculation, and then we also go by what's going on in the room itself. So, but this is just a good place for us to like jump off for the other stuff where we're going to use these vent sizes in the rooms. But when we draw it in our layout in Revit, it's going to look a little different. So we're going to use some different figures in that as well. But let's finish up with the calculations and jump into the fun stuff now. So I tortured y'all enough with this. Let's figure out how we actually kind of draw this stuff. That's what we really want to do. Because what you'll be assigned is you will create the architectural model, and then you'll send this off to an MEP person, and they will import the MEP stuff, which is what we're going to do now. So I'm just going to show you a couple of quick things on MEP, and then we're going to insert it into one of our models that we have that's going to be live, and then we'll open the floor for any questions. So at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and do like a quick building. So I'm going to go to File. I'm going to do a new project, and I'm going to start that just in a mechanical template, which is where I had all y'all start everything else. As we do another version of this, we'll actually import a template as well, because there's ways that we can do that, and we'll talk about that next class. So let me just throw up a couple of walls and a couple other things that I need in here, and we can get started. I'm going to put my ceiling in. I'm going to leave that as a ceiling tile. I'm going to have that set to 18 foot. I know that's not shown up. I'll go to mechanical, but it's in the right spot. Mechanical ceiling. So we have that there. And then I also want to put that second floor on here as well. So I'm going to go to floor plan, mechanical 2, and I'm going to add my floors. I said to make this 3-inch. And hit OK. Now what I'm doing when I'm creating this floor and ceiling, I want to make sure I have this plenum that's open here. And best measurement for this is usually about 2 feet. We should have this set at level 2, which is right at 10 feet going down. And then I've got my ceiling set at 10 feet. I mean, at 8 feet. So I do have that gap. It may be a little tight. If I wanted to change that up to give me a little bit extra room, I could actually just change my level 2 to 10 foot 6 inches and give me a little bit extra room there. Let's leave it at 10 foot and see how we can fit everything in. So we're going to work everything into this area right here. And we're going to start that by going to our ceiling plan level 1. So we've got our ceiling grid laid out here. So we want to look at the different component parts that we need for our air handling unit. So everything that we're going to use is going to be in our systems tab. Some of the things that we're going to be using are our duct tool, our air terminal, flex ducts, and then also our mechanical equipment. So this is the majority of the information that we'll be working on just for the HVAC system right here. So there's different ways that we can put in these products. We can put in our air terminals first. We can put in our mechanical first. You basically want to think about how this is going to be laid out in this space, how these ducts are going to work, because you don't have a lot of room for them to work or run. So sometimes the easiest thing to start with is putting in our mechanical equipment first. And our mechanical equipment is like our air handler and things like that. So we click on that, make it active, and come over to our type selector. We see we have different pieces. There's air handling unit for split system. In this particular one, we're going to use our variable air volume unit, because the way this lays out, it's just going to fit nicely within that space. And I just know that from working on these things previously. Variable air volume is a type of heating and ventilating and or air conditioning system. Unlike constant airflow system, which applies constant airflow at a variable temperature, a VAV system varies the airflow at a constant temperature. So that's a basic idea of what it is. As you've seen in the other information in the mechanical lecture, there's a ton of different units, but this is just the one that we're going to use in this particular exercise right here. We're going to use a mid-sized one. We're going to use this size 3 8-inch inlet. That's just because I've used this one before, and this is a smaller room. And notice when I come over here, I can't see it. And if I just drop it here, I'm going to have an arrow. So I'm going to undo that. And when I bring that in, I have to have it set at my elevation. So I'm actually going to set this to 9 foot because I want it to be over my ceiling grid. And then when I change that to 9 foot, I have this here. So I'm going to just drop it right here for now. I want it kind of central. And then
do you want that central? This is going to be for the entire floor, correct?
yeah, I'm going to show you how that's, I want it right here. And there's going to be different ways that you want to place it in different times. Other times we're going to have it close to that mechanical room that we created in our floor plan. For this one, I'm going to just put it right here. And let me show you how it's going to work here and why we want to move it in different locations or rotate this. But I'm just going to drop it here for now for a start. So when we dropped it in, what's interesting about these electrical things is we actually have live connections on here that work. So when we make this live and we click on it, we zoom in a little closer. Here we have our electrical connection that we would have. We also have our inflow air right here, and we have our outflow air right here. So this means that air that's going back into the unit are recirculated air, and this is air that's going out in this side right here. So we have an 8-inch and we have a 16-inch. So we're just going to use the 8-inch actually with our symbols on here. We're actually going to use the 16-inch one for the air to come back in, a 14-inch for the air going out. And this is where it gets a little confusing because we want to think about how we want these guys to lay out, how the ductwork is going to flow and things like that. So since this is actually not a great location for it to go out, because I need to add a duct this way and I would have to double back this way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just hit my space bar. And when this is active, notice that just rotated. So now this is a little bit better layout for me here because I can put my outgoing air here and I can put my incoming air vent here. And what does that mean for us? I'm going to drop in my air vents next in my air terminals. This is the supply diffuser. Once again, I can't see anything here. I don't know why they don't have it default to like a height, but they always have it set at 0. So if I actually drop it in, it would be only, let me just drop one here, you can see what happens. Nothing happened there, but if I go to 3D, there's my air vent right there on the floor, but it defaults to that. So I'm gonna highlight that, and I'm gonna set that at my ceiling height, which is going to be 8 feet. Set that back up to 8 feet, and notice how that fits flush with the ceiling now. So let's go back to ceiling plan level 1. And you know this is outgoing air because this is marked with an X, and we have our outgoing arrows here. Let's drop in a couple other ones. We'll drop, forgot to change this stupid thing again. And I'll drop that one there. Let's go back to 3D and fix that. 8 foot. Yeah, that fits in really very tightly. All right, back to ceiling plan 1. So here's my outgoing air. So I also want to do return air in each room. So I'm going to go back to my air terminal, to my type selector, and here we have our return diffuser. And I'm going to drop them. Oops, I need to change that to 8 foot. Oh, I always forget that. Drop one here. One here. And one here. And what I'm trying to do is get this lined up with the ceiling grid. So it'll fall within these grid spaces. These are set to a 2x4 grid, and these are large grid diffusers at 2 feet. And then we run our ducts to those that way. So these I may move around a little bit. This is just kind of laid out for now. But I think I've got them set, so they should be okay. One of the things that you'll notice is that sometimes these arrows get a bit busy. And if you remember that the single line across this way is return air, and this one is supply air, we can actually turn these arrows off. So what I'm going to do is select this diffuser. I'm going to right click and go to select all instances. And then I can come over to my properties and just turn all these arrows off. And it just cleans up the drawing a lot nicer. You do the same with this, select all instances and turn these arrows off. So much cleaner. Now all right, we've got these kind of laid out. The next thing we want to do is lay out our ductwork. So with this active, this is my outgoing airflow. So for my outgoing airflow, I want this duct to run this way up to here. I'm going to run it across this way and then down to this duct right here. And I'll click on this symbol. I'll run that there. I'll run that back down in there. So I've got my outgoing air laid out very nicely. Next thing I want to do is go to my incoming air, which is right here. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on here, start that return vent. I've got my return vent that way. Next thing I want to do is connect these vents. A couple of things I don't like about this. This is going to be an awkward connection to have this vent here. So I'm actually going to click on that and move that over a little bit. And then for this one, I'm just going to move that to right here because I think that'll be a better connection rather than on these elbow joints. So next thing we want to do is lay out our connections. A couple of different ways that we can do that. Let me move this down a little bit. So I'm going to run my ductwork out here, a little duct there. I'm going to run one out here for my connections. It's not going to work on that one. Cancel. All right. Then that final thing I want to do is I want to use these flex ducts to connect the vents to the ductwork. So we've got that return air laid out nicely. So we're going to do the same thing with our outgoing air. Move this duct. And the hardest part is really kind of laying this out. So you use the least amount of duct work and make it as efficient as possible. Oh. Notice when I drew that in, it came out pink, which gives my return air. So if I jump over to my properties, I can change that system type from return air to supply air. And that changed that to, oops, change that to blue. So if it's ever backwards, you can always change that on this part as well. So ductwork. It's return air, that should be supply air. Here. And now I'll go ahead and connect that with our flex ducts. All right, so that is our completed heating and cooling system. Let's go to 3D and check it out, see what happened. Actually, it looks pretty good. There's a couple of tweaks I need to make on here. As we twist it around, notice that these guys are not connected, but that's okay. That's just an easy fix. They technically are connected. It's just they're so close, it's hard for it to show up as a connection. So like if I did this, for instance, All right, there it is. So yeah, I just have to move it out a little further for us to see that connection there. I mean, that's not optimal. We actually want to keep the measurement correct. I'm just showing you how we just move this out a little bit. And it's actually a really tight space. Let me just see how this all works.
Is there a certain length that you want to have that flex duct, like shorter than 5 feet, longer than a foot? Like, is there a certain length you want that?
There's not really a certain length, but we want to have it connected. You know, when you're running, sometimes they'll just use a regular flex duct, especially in like a residential. You'll see all flex ducts that are worked.
Yeah,
That is,
my attic is all flex duct.
yeah, especially in residential and things like that. With this being commercial property, it makes it a little bit, you know, harder to get everything laid out, especially, and it's not as durable. So that's why we have the metal ducts and connect it with these with the flex ducts. But no, there's not a set, you know, amount. I like to try and get it as close as possible. So you know, there's not that much, but obviously you can see that, you know, if I wanted to actually kind of have this over here, I could use this, move this to this part for my flex duct. So there's no set,
Okay.
you know. And then also, that's a good question. If it also depends on the manufacturer. There may be certain specifications that the manufacturer has that they said for the optimal use of their equipment, it could be, you know, 2 feet of flex duct or anything like that. A lot of that's going to depend on the manufacturer of these different individual pieces. So this is just kind of like an overall idea of how this thing works.
Okay. And do you want a return and a supply in every room?
Yes, yeah, we're just going to use that same one that we have here. So it's the same sizing, even though we did the sizing calculation, we're just going to use the same one that's on here as well.
I don't even remember what that was, but I'm sure
That's
it's,
okay. It's
it's,
the default, so you're good.
okay, cool.
All right, this is not working for me.
Hello, Ms. Martin.
There we go. Yes.
How you doing? It's Ishmael.
Hey, Ishmael, how are you?
MIA. We all been MIA somehow.
I know. I'm glad you made it to class.
Yeah.
But there's lots. If you have plenty of time to catch up, so you're good. No worries.
Yeah, I'm not too worried.
No.
You do a great job.
Thank you.
But I'm looking at these. I've never seen a house where there's a return in every room. Is that practical?
Oh, yeah, for a house that's different. Remember this?
Oh, that's a
We're
commercial.
doing commercial. Yeah, we're doing
Right.
commercial. Yeah, this is commercial. If you're doing we want to return in every room for the commercial. If it was a residential, yeah, you would only need one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Refer
right.
back to that, the mechanical you know,
Yeah.
presentation we
I'm
looked at at the
still
beginning.
trying to transition.
Yeah, it's all good. No worries. But
Okay.
yeah, you can see how, yeah, we want to lay out a return for each one of these commercial rooms. And the hard part is just making sure that it lays between these two spaces. You can also change the size of these vents as well, these ductwork. So if we click on this one and we go over here to our properties, this one sets 12 inches. Some of our duct calculations that we came up with, we use an 8-inch. We can change that here as well. So what would typically happen is the person that is your drafts person that's laying out this would just lay out everything per how the engineer has worked out the calculations. And we can adjust those as needed. But I just need y'all to know how to kind of work the general information on this. So you can't change the size of these. I'm just changing these to 8 inches. And notice when I change that, how everything just kind of corrects itself, which is really nice. It adds those connections. So it does show you how that will segue properly from a larger connection to a smaller connection. As we get into even bigger buildings, we can lay out larger ductwork to go to smaller ductwork, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next class. So let's change this to realistic.
Do we have to use the flex duct? I mean, isn't there a way, isn't there a hard duct that like literally goes, and I can't remember the name of it now, but it's like an L shape. It goes, then it turns flush at the end, or do you have to use flex?
There is, you can use the other ones, but the flex ducts just work better for the connections for this. So
Okay.
if you want to play around with it a little bit, you can do that. I tend to default to just the flex ducts right here. So if we wanted to use this other one, let's try and do that. Let's add another vent and see what.
Sorry.
No, just I wouldn't need to. Please don't apologize. Yeah. So let's add another terminal over here. Let's turn these guys off. You can leave these on. I just think they muddy up your drawing. That's my return diffuser. I want supply 8-foot. Arrows are back. Okay, so now if we get our ducts and we do our drop down on our ducts, there's a bunch of different ones that we can choose from. You've got like these oblong shaped ones, the round ones. I tend to use the radius ones. And if we went back and just added that here, we're not going to get that same connection that we do with this flex duct at this point. You would have to add other additional pieces to it. And we can talk about that for the next one. For this exercise, just use the flex duct. And when we add the additional stuff and make it a little bit more complicated, and on Wednesday, we can go from there. So for this one,
Okay,
I would
cool.
just go ahead and go back and add the flex duct. Like even if I did it from here to here, you can see how that's not a great connection either, which is why I like to add the other section to it. This would not be a proper connection. You would definitely want to add another bit of proper duct on that before you connected it by the flex duct. Add that there, even that small amount, and then we'll come back with that flex duct here. And jump to 3D. And I need to rearrange the way this one is laying because it's not lying properly. Let's see if that will show up now. Still not working. There we go, much better. And let's take a look at it here. Yeah. Here, I'd want to move this one closer into this grid space. This one is within this grid space. And my return air, that way it lays nicely within my grid, for my ceiling grid. Let's go to 3D.
Do you want return and supply separated? I mean, do they have to have a certain space between them?
Well, you don't want them next to each other. You do want them somewhat separated. You know, it wouldn't, I mean, you'd have air going out here and then air coming in here if they were next to each other. So you do want to have some kind of space between each one that you have laid out.
That would be a great waste of air.
Exactly, blowing out, yeah, blowing out
We'll be
cold
going,
air and then sucking it
right
back
on
in.
in.
Exactly.
Well, that's what I was wondering if, because I'd love to have the vents centered in the room, but then there's probably a light fixture centered in the room, so.
Exactly. There's a lot of stuff that comes into play once the start gets, you know, it gets busier and busier, especially when we're playing with just this plenum space here. yeah, it gets rather complicated. And then we've got to run like cables for lights and stuff like that. So yeah, it does get very, and then some plumbing that runs through this space as well. So it does get very complicated. So the goal is to have everything laid out so it's as little ductwork as possible, because you'll save money on that, and to also have it laid out so it lays correctly within your ceiling grid, so we don't have any issues when they lay that out as well. You can see how that would cause issues if it intersected that ceiling grid and cause that. There's always something that's going to happen, that's something that's going to need to be adjusted, especially in the real world. But basically, this is what we want to look at, something like real simple laid out like this. Now, the challenge with the bigger building that you have is how are you going to get that laid out within that space? And let me go to that. So here we've got our HVAC room. So in this particular case, since we know this is a commercial building and we have an HVAC system, what we want to do is start with that HVAC system over in this area. I just kind of randomly placed it in that smaller building. I had the option to do that there. And but in this one, we want to start over here. So you'll want to drop in, go to systems, drop in your, oh, I need to load it in this one because I'm still working in, this one I'm still working in architectural. So where I found all of my mechanical components would be under going to mechanical, go to MEP, air side components, my air handling units, and there's a bunch that I can choose from right here. These are the ones that we're going to use next time. So I'll just pick one. Split system usually works pretty good. I'll use that. I would actually use this one. I'm working ahead of myself a little bit. And I drop that one right here. Have that placed in my HVAC room or above my HVAC space. And here we have my connections. This is my outgoing air here and my incoming air here. So if I wanted to, I might probably want to rotate that. So I've got my outgoing air in one direction. And remember, you can split off this to different ducts going each way. And then I've got my return air coming this way. What I find also helps, and if I'm able to print this out, I'll print it out and I'll draw it by hand first to make sure that my lines don't intersect my return air. You can also do that on here by going to annotate, and we can use a detail line. And that way I just kind of like just draw it to see if the ideas that I have are going to work. Like if I have the one going this way, and then I've got my other line going another way, and make sure I can hit all my vents. But you want to place your vents and then lay your duct lines out how you think, how the best way you think they're going to connect. But sometimes I like to use this detail line to make sure I've got it laid out instead of laying out all the ducts, figuring out, no, that's not going to work because they're going to intersect in this place right here. And then you just kind of go back and then you lay your ducts in the direction that you laid out your detail lines. But then, you can delete or hide your detail lines as well. So I find it easier just to go back in and sketch it out to make sure it lays out. Because depending on what size unit we end up using, in the other one, it's actually a little bit easier because you're using the one that I showed you originally. But as we get into like some of these bigger ones, we're going to be using some of these other HVAC units that are going to be going from this room up into the ductwork and stuff like that. So, yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and that's part of confusion and also the part that keeps you interested in actually doing it, because you got to figure it out like another puzzle. It's a different type of puzzle this time as opposed to before when we were working on architectural puzzles. So that's pretty much it for that basic lecture for today. Best thing for you to do is just kind of jump in and get started. Where did that mark? Here we are. So yeah, you want to look into something that end up with something that looks like this. And you want to do that with your first and second floor. They should look rather similar because there's not a lot of changes in that. There's a few different things that will be changed, but you know, I have no doubt that y'all can figure that out. If you need to have a little bit extra space between these two to make that room for your plenum, remember, come to your level section, and then if you change the size here, it's going to move everything. You don't have to worry about moving everything else, and it just gives you a little bit extra room to make that work out. But even at 18 inches, it should work out pretty well. So you should be able to get that knocked out by Wednesday, and then on Wednesday we'll do another version of the same thing in a different way. Any questions, guys?
No, that's it. I'm good.
Yeah. I think this is a good intro to it, and then we'll get into a little bit more complicated ones next. So yeah, unless there's any questions, we'll go ahead and drop. I'll post the recording, and I'll see y'all on Wednesday.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
All right,
Have a good one.
You too. Bye.